Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, happy lunch, depending on where you are. My name's Sherry Milligan. I'm Vice President of Nonprofit Strategy here at Insync Corporation, and welcome to today's webinar. Most of you've probably been on a webinar before, so you know the drill, and that is that you're all on mute, so you won't be able to verbally ask a question, but you have a chat window, and if you write your question in there, I'll keep track of those and ask our panelists at the appropriate time. If a couple of you wouldn't mind just writing in that chat window so I can make sure it's working, just say hello or tell me where you're from or something. I'll know that we are communicating. Hello, Anastasia. Hi, Brent. Jessica, Allison, Wesley, thank you. Very good. So, I'm also pleased to tell you today that we are able to offer 1 CAE credit for this program, courtesy of Gravitate, who is an approved ASAE provider. And our program will go for an hour today. So with that, I am pleased to welcome and introduce our speaker today. She is Christie Gunden, Product Marketing and Content Manager for Gravitate Solutions. So she's a marketing expert, but more than that, she's a data expert and using that data for marketing insights, which of course is really why we collect data, isn't it? We want to use our data to help grow and serve our members through product and service development. Gravitate Solutions is a company that specializes in serving the association market, and one unique tool they have right now is called Nucleus. Nucleus is a data aggregation and analysis platform. So what it does is collect and aggregates data from disparate sources so that you can use it to get to those data-driven decision-making scenarios that we're all interested in. It can blend and analyze data from various sources, such as your AMS, and whether that be IMAS or NetForum or Nimble or whatever, your LMS, your event management systems, email systems, Google Analytics. And what's unique about Nucleus is that it has these out-of-the-box integrations, and you can get up and running in several weeks rather than several months. So you might want to take a look at Nucleus. Our goals for today's program are threefold. One, we're going to talk a little bit about emerging best practices in data. And then Christie will share how others are successfully using their data, some case studies, you know, what makes them successful with their data programs. And she'll give some tangible takeaways, a few pointers and tips of things that you can do today to better manage your organization's data. So with that, I am going to give you the controls here, Christie, and it is coming over to you right now.
Okay, so I am showing my screen, and Sherry, can you confirm which screen you're seeing?
I'm seeing hello.
Okay, great. Well, hello everybody. Thank you, Sherry, and thanks for having me today. I'm really, really happy to be here. And thanks everyone on the call for taking the time out of your busy days to tune in to this webinar. As Sherry said, my name is Christie Gunden, and I am the Product Marketing and Content Manager. I am the Product Marketing and Content Manager at Gravitate Solutions. I'm speaking today because I believe in data. And I believe that data can empower all of us to think smarter and to work better. And because Gravitate Solutions is deeply entrenched in data analytics with associations, I get to see that transformation firsthand. So I want to speak today out of that experience. So let's go ahead and get started. For the sake of time and with my trust in this audience, I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to assume that you have some ideas about the power of data and some ideas about its capability to transform an organization. So I'm not going to focus this presentation on selling that. I'm not going to focus the presentation on, the complete picture that data can provide or how it empowers those who understand it to make better business choices. I'm going to jump straight into the good stuff. And I'm hoping that this will be helpful to you in some capacity, regardless of where you are right now in your data analytics journey. So getting started here. Data conversations, they've evolved, right? And what used to take place in the IT department has now become mainstream. And we know this. We know this because, Gartner tells us this. We also know this from more personal experience, like at the ASA annual conference, for example, just a short time ago. There were 9 sessions that specifically talked about data. And countless other sessions that had mentioned it throughout the content. We also know this because on a more personal note, many of you have been mandated to, quote, do something with data analytics. And I'm air quoting that, you can't see me, but to figure out data analytics and then implement it across your organization. And if this task is your responsibility, you might be wondering where to start. Well, I want to tell you that you're in the right place. This is what we're going to be talking about today on the webinar here. So there is a scale of how your organization is using data. On one end, you're not using it at all. On the other end, you're using it to make, decisions in every facet. So first, you want to evaluate what your current status is in your organization. Regardless of where you fall on this spectrum, you're going to have room for improvement and you're going to have room for maintenance. So begin thinking through the growth areas and start thinking through which tactics or which strategies that you implement currently that could, in your everyday work, that could really benefit from the insight that data provides. As you think about this, there are 3 perspectives that you want to consider this from. You want to consider from an individual standpoint, from you personally. You want to consider that of your team and how your team can use data, and also from your organization as a whole. How does data, or how could data, fit into your overall organizational strategy? Depending on your role at your association, one of these will probably make the most sense for you to really focus in and narrow in on, although all of them are worth considering. One of the things that you want to do as you're getting started is to identify a data champion. A data champion is an advocate. This is somebody in your organization who is a natural enthusiast. They believe in the power of data. We see that sometimes data culture, it grows from the top down, and sometimes it's grassroots, and it's sold from the bottom up. So it really depends on your organization. But a data advocate is someone who can help secure organizational buy-in, which is going to be really important for the success of data in your organization. And part of earning that organizational buy-in is setting appropriate expectations. Now, that's part of the organizational buy-in, but I also want to set some of those expectations with you so you can, be thinking about them. So as you're doing this and as you're starting to think about data as a long-term investment. I know that it's really tempting to want to see the results immediately, and you will see some data insights immediately, don't get me wrong. But by and large, this is going to require an upfront investment in time and money that's going to pay off a little bit more down the road with a fully realized ROI. So most organizations that are seeing data-informed decision-making in their organizations, they're seeing that it starts out small and mostly operational at first. But as over time it grows and it becomes, it scales to larger and more strategic decisions. So making another assumption here, I'm assuming that you have those organizational and departmental and individual goals. So as you're considering your goals, define supporting metrics, and you might already have these. A common pitfall that I often see in organizations or associations specifically is that they set this really macro goal without any real way of achieving it. So my advice here is this: don't be afraid to set smaller goals. For example, a lot of organizations have a macro goal of increasing retention rate. I think that's a pretty common one. So setting a supportive and more granular goal would require first figuring out, well, which demographic is leaving and challenging the retention rate. Maybe it's millennials. I think that's a challenge in a lot of organizations. So what would make millennials stay? And if they were interested and engaged, they would probably stay. So a granular goal in this example might be increasing engagement amongst millennials, which would ultimately support that larger macro goal of increasing member retention rate. And depending on what types of tools that you use to track your data, some of them you can even set goals within the platform and you can track against those kinds of things automatically. The next thing we want to talk about here is data to the people. And there are two real schools of thought with this. So we'll kind of talk through both of them. The first one is organization-wide adoption. This is giving data to everybody. The entire organization is adopting data as a practice. The other school of thought is keeping a highly trained team of data scientists. And in that scenario, so data scientists, they're typically found at larger associations. They're responsible for supplying the entire organization with reports and analytics. Excuse me. And if this is how your organization is structured, you probably are familiar with some of the problems that this setup creates. It has oftentimes results in resource bottlenecks, which can result in delayed reports or maybe even unactionable reports by the time you're able to lay eyes on them. The other problem, and maybe this one is a bigger problem, but this one is that the everyday average person never really learns or knows what to do with data because it's not part of their responsibility. And that's just not the way the technology is heading. That's not the way the market is trending. That's not where data is trending. We're moving to a place now where everybody needs to have some level of understanding. And that brings us to the other school of thought, which is this organization-wide adoption. Organization-wide adoption, it gives data to everyone, and it works to create almost a culture in which all teams are relying on data to make decisions. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. This is everyone from accounting to IT and membership and marketing and even the C-suite. Everyone's using data to make decisions. So this philosophy, it reduces the reliance on a specific team or an individual because that person's not responsible for delivering all of the reports. Everyone's able to access them independently. So this increases efficiency and ultimately it develops a more competent team. So this point about training and education, it's not specific to a tool, although depending on which tool you implement in your organization or set of tools, you may need to have some kind of specific training if it's not a very intuitive tool. But this point is more about providing professional development. You want to provide professional development so that every person is equipped to access the data, to be able to ask questions of it, to be able to manipulate it or manipulate it and interpret it, and to take action ultimately on that data. This is about building up a team that's stronger and more capable than what you currently have because they understand how to use data, and that's powerful. So as you're thinking through all of these things, an obvious one here is figuring out how you're going to access the data. You have two real options here. You know, the reality is that your data lives in different systems. You've got an AMS, an email marketing tool, maybe a marketing automation platform, a community platform, an event management tool, maybe even a learning management system. The list goes on. Okay, so these are your two basic options. You can create a manual report, or you can use a tool or a combination of, you can use a tool or a platform. So let's talk briefly about the two of these. Okay, so for a manual report, we've all been there, right? I mean, we've all created manual reports. We've all done this. So we know that it's time intensive. It takes a good amount of effort. It takes hours. It requires pulling and exporting data from various different systems. This can result in unreliable views of data and various ways of interpreting it. And depending on who pulls the metrics, it might end up looking different each time. So we also know that as soon as the report is pulled, that it's a static report, right? So it's outdated, and you're no longer making the decisions using live data because, like I said, it's outdated. You're not using current data. Alternatively, you can use the other option, which is a data analytics platform. And this might be something that you purchase. It might be a freebie. It might be a combination of those. However you manage to figure it out for your organization, this is going to be something that can integrate your data from the different systems. And it becomes a central place where all of the members from your team can log in. Everyone can join and see what the metrics are. Everyone knows how you're progressing towards them. And what this becomes in your organization is a single source of truth. So in other words, there are no other competing metrics that need to be brought to the table. Everyone is in agreement that this is the standard. And that's what can be possible here when you're using a data analytics platform. The process of learning how your organization can use data, and I have to emphasize that this looks different at every organization. Every organization figures out how to use data in a different way. But the process, the commonality is that it's a fluid process. You'll see that data, as you access it, it will make you ask different questions, more informed questions, that you never would have otherwise known to ask previously. And that's okay. That's good. That's a good thing. You're going to continue to grow your business knowledge, and the data analytics process will grow with you. And because of this, I recommend starting small and manageably, because you're expecting that this process that's starting out small will grow. A main reason that data projects fail is due to over-planning at the beginning of the process. So you can't really plan for what you don't know. And so this process has to be fluid, because as you're gaining insight, you're going to want to ask more questions. And if you think you know everything at the beginning, you're going to be in a difficult position when you need to make modifications along the way if you don't have a flexible system. So I'd like to switch gears here, and I'd like to share with you some ways that forward-thinking organizations are beginning to use data strategically. The following section here is going to cover just that. So as I'm covering different use cases, think about which ones might make sense at your association. Use data to prove the total value of membership. I'm seeing this most often in trade organizations. Data can prove out member engagement. And this is everything from event attendance to community contributions and otherwise. We're seeing some organizations creating a member scorecard, member value scorecard, so that the value of participation is crystal clear. This next one here is about using data to capitalize on what's working and cut what isn't. For example, optimize your top performing campaigns by looking at which emails are being delivered, how many people are opening them, how many people are clicking them, and how many people are engaging with the content, and what type of content. So you can get this 360-degree view by blending data from different platforms and seeing it in the same place. And if you stick on the line, I'm going to continue I'll show you some examples later on of that so you can see what that looks like. The last one here on this slide is about the annual conference, right? So if you have an annual conference and you have exhibitors, I don't have to tell you how challenging that can be to demonstrate value to them. Associations are more easily selling exhibitor space by using data. They can use it to assign a dollar value. So you want to show things like how many people attended the conference, what percentage of those walked past the exhibitor's booth, along with their job titles, so we know that the exhibitors are able to target the right person. And then you show the number of attendees at the vendor's breakout session. So you can calculate that if every person in this example is priced at X value, this conference was worth Y amount, but the exhibitor only paid Z. This changes the game for exhibitors because it gives them insight into their conference sponsorships. It also helps organizations with equipping them with relevant information that they need to optimize things like space layout for exhibitors or the conference topics or many other important aspects of an event. Perhaps most importantly of all, the organizations can justify exhibitor sponsorship by analyzing the engagement according to the job title. Like CIOs did this, membership people did that, marketing people did this. So exhibitors can segment their most important audiences and be sure that they're getting in front of them. Data shows which sessions are most interesting to your conference attendees. It shows which content is being accessed the most on your website. And it shows which discussion topics are receiving the most comments in your community. You can use all of this information to optimize content creation and optimize engagement among your membership base. You can also use that data to create personalized user experiences across your platforms. This can be possible over a website or a community or an online app. Once an individual is identified, you can use different data. Maybe it's historical data of how they participated with your organization in the past, or demographic information, or membership data. You can use any of that data to make personalized, tailored recommendations for them. And we're seeing this one most often in professional associations. So for example, if your organization has a local conference and it's near a member who lives in Chicago, you can make a recommendation to register for the conference and attend a session that will be of specific interest to them. And you know this because it's based on historical data of how they've interacted with your organization in the past. Some tools will have sentiment analysis, which analyzes the text and gets insight out of it. So for example, in your social media or community platforms, instead of what you probably normally do, which is going in and manually reading and analyzing each post for either this was a positive or a negative post, sentiment analysis, it can organize posts or topics and provide information on how members share about it and whether it was perceived as positive or negative, which is really helpful information, and it saves a lot of time. You can use data to find topics that are most interesting to your member base, and you can cover them thoroughly instead of producing that content that's an inch deep and a mile wide. Marketers, myself included, are guilty of throwing out wide-ranging messages without really knowing what's going to stick. Data can help marketers. It helps them narrow in on efforts and increase successes. So our next one here, data is reliable to show whether or not initiatives are successful and whether or not they deserve continued funding and resources. This decision is often left to the most senior person's opinion, which we all know can sometimes be wrong. It can lead down a unnecessarily difficult or ineffective path. So use data to make decisions instead of relying on gut instinct. You'll see repeatable successes and cost savings when you do this. Okay, so how are associations using data in real and impactful ways? I'm about to show you an example, but before I do, some of you might think that you could never afford to do something like what I'm about to show you. But I do want to preface this by saying that there are a lot of options on the market. And some of these are for associations, other of them are just for everybody. But in general, technology has advanced by leaps and bounds over the past few years. And it's more affordable than it's been in the past. It's also more intuitive, and it's easier to adopt across an organization. So here's an example of a dashboard with metrics that support an organization's annual conference. I'm going to show you a few of these in a row, so just keep in mind that this sequence of visualizations, this is blending data. This is blending data from an AMS and from an event registration system. And by combining the data and blending it from those two systems, you can see a more holistic picture of the conference registration. Okay, so this particular organization has set a registration goal, which you can see on the first card there. They're tracking against it to see how they're shaping up as the conference approaches. And they're currently at 58% of their goal, which is great information to have, but it can be made better. It can be made better with context. So let's drill into that middle chart and see how the current registration compares with data from the last 3 years. This slide here provides a frame of reference. A frame of reference for how the organization is comparing, is faring in comparison to the last 3 years. The yellow line, it represents 2017. So you can see that it's lagging behind a little bit of where it's been in previous years. Nothing too huge, but definitely something worth noting. Again, this information is really helpful, but it would be even more helpful with some more context. So in order to find that, let's dig in a little bit more. We're going to break out the registration by attendee type. Okay, so this is our third look into this data. Okay, so this chart shows data from 2017 on the top and 2016 on the bottom. The top group here that's circled is academia, and you can see the numbers are small, but you can see that it's this one in particular. 2017 is lagging behind 2016. This is the group that's missing. This is why registration is lower in 2017 as opposed to other years. This is the meat. This is the stuff that gives us an action item. Because we know that the conference registration is lagging behind other years in this particular group, the organization in this case could develop a campaign that's specifically for those folks in academia. And the campaign would be intended to encourage registration or to develop additional topics of interest for the academia audience. This doesn't have to be a really complicated effort. I mean, perhaps this looks as simple as sending an email campaign to that group, or it might be as complex as developing a whole new track for them at the conference for those attendees. So there's a number of different ways that they can look at that, but again, I mean, this is a really simple piece of information that's going to help the organization to course correct before they get to the conference and realize this entire group is really missing from 2017. They're able to look at this information, course correct, and make really targeted and directed efforts that can pay dividends. Okay, so where does this leave us? I want you to come away from this presentation with new ideas, of course. But I also want you to have, like Sherry said, some takeaways, some tangible things to help you get started. So let's talk about 3 things that you should get into place as we're starting to head into 2018. First, you want to consider your budget. This is a great time of year to begin thinking through your budget. There are a lot of factors to consider, like tools or staff that you might need to manage those, changes that you'll want to make over time as you're starting to understand your data better. It's time to start thinking about these things. And a shameless plug here, I wrote a blog post about budget considerations. It's available on the Gravitate Solutions website. So if you're not sure where to get started with a budget, that might be helpful for you to check out. Second, you're going to work on identifying that data champion. This is going to be that person who's going to advocate for incorporating data into your meetings, into your daily work life and daily execution, and into your overall organizational strategy. It's likely that your organization already has someone who's already passionate about creating a data culture. You need to equip them to execute. I really cannot overemphasize the importance of earning organizational buy-in and how that will contribute to your success. Third, and lastly, consider your strategy for using and sharing the data. It lives in different platforms, so like we mentioned earlier, you're going to need to think through if you're going to pull this manually, create manual reports, and if you have the resources to support you in that effort. Or if you're going to evaluate data analytics tools and roll that out organization-wide. Regardless of which approach you take here, once you have the data, you must think through how you're going to share it with others. That's a key part of this strategy, because the truth is, if you aren't doing this, your data is going to exist in a vacuum and you aren't really using it. You're not going to be using it to its optimal capability. So that concludes my presentation for today. Again, thank you very much for your time. And as we transition into question and answer, I want to point out a free resource that's available on Gravitate Solutions website. You can see it down there in the bottom left in blue. This is a free data analytics checklist. So if you're thinking about data analytics tools, the data analytics platform, there's a lot of different things to consider. And so I created this checklist for you guys today so you can go in there and access it and just make sure that as you're thinking about all of the different options here that you're not leaving anything on the table. I also included my email address, cgunden@gravitatesolutions.com. You can feel free to email me if I can lend a hand or if I can dive deeper into any of the topics that we've covered today. So I'll turn it back over to Sherry. Sherry, do we have any questions from our audience?
Yes. Well, actually, I was going to start with a question from me. And Lindsay, perhaps while I'm asking my question, somebody was saying that the Christie's email is blocked on the screen. Would you mind in the chat window maybe putting Christie's email address there for everybody to see? And, you know, Christie, I work with a lot of associations, and a lot of them are small organizations, small associations. Are these data aggregation tools easy enough for a small association to use?
Oh, absolutely. And there are, I can't emphasize, there are so many tools on the market, and they range in everything from, you know, really, really simple, basic freebie tools to very complex analysis where you really would require a data scientist on your team to dig in there and to slice and dice and analyze and pull reports because, you know, something like that wouldn't really be accessible for the entire team. And there's kind of everything in the middle. So there's definitely the ability to get in no matter what your real technical expertise is. You don't have to be a data expert. You don't have to be a database expert. You just have to be able to log in and find a tool that works for you. I mean, it depends. You know, smaller teams, in my experience, don't really have a ton of, they don't have the data scientist on their team. So you would want to look for something that is more user-friendly, has like a simple interface, and but you don't want to simplify too much. You want to be sure that as you're investigating this kind of thing that, you know, whatever tool you use is capable of answering some complex questions.
Okay, and here's a good question. As we build a data-driven culture, do you have advice on the data management side of it? For instance, who should be able to change records in the database, etc.?
Yeah, you know, I would say that's something that probably looks different at different organizations based on how you have it set up. So if you're working to build a data culture, that's going to be something that involves everybody, right? You want everybody able to get in there and to access the data. But as far as the management side, I would recommend keeping that to, at least at first, keeping it to a small team. And you might have different folks on that team from different departments. I wouldn't necessarily say that only IT should own it or only marketing should own it. But if you're starting out small, that would look like a small team starting in on that process, if not just one person.
Kathy is asking, do you have a sample of a data firm RFP? So I assume, you know, what kinds of questions, if you're looking to establish a relationship with a data analytics firm, what kinds of things should you be looking for?
You know what? I have to be really honest with you on that one, Kathy. I don't deal a whole lot with that within my particular role, but I'd be really happy to follow up with you on that and to get a better answer for you.
And here's a good question because we always are wondering how much data should we store? Should we store known data even if it may not be relevant now? For
Absolutely.
example, we partnered with a big data firm that told us a member is interested in video games. That does not have anything relevant to our organization. Still, should we still keep it?
I would say absolutely, definitely. And it all comes back to this being a fluid process, because as you're starting to ask questions of your data, you have some initial things that you want to know, right? And video games is probably not one of those things that you initially think of to ask about. And that might never be a relevant piece of information for you. But as you're starting to dig in and learn more about your audience, you are going to have more complex questions, and you are going to start wondering more things about your audience. And so if you've only put in a certain small amount of data, you're not going to be able to ask those questions, and your system's not going to be able to grow with you over time, because you're going to be limited by only putting in a small amount of data.
Very good. And I just learned that for RFP questions, that in that link, that info.gravitateSolutions.com/insync, the data analytics checklist, that will have some good questions in there that you might want to avail yourself of, Kathy. And let's see here. Is it best practice for boards to have real-time access to data? And from my role, I'm just going to say that in a lot of the AMS solutions that we implement, we do see now that board members are given logins and special security privileges so that they can see pieces and parts of the data that's coming through. How many members do we have today? How many people are signed up for the conference? So I would say, from my perspective, I do think it's best practice for a board to have real-time access to data. Christie, what do you think?
Yeah, to be honest, we've seen it done both ways. I hate to say that it depends, but it really does on your culture within your organization. I think as far as the upside, yeah, I mean there's lots of benefits to having live data for your board, right? They can log in and see exactly what it is that they're looking for. A con to that might be that, maybe they have real-time access to data that's not as relevant to them, and maybe they get a little bit distracted by that, or they're spending too much time focusing on things that they don't necessarily need to be focused on. But I would think that if the data that you're giving them access to is very specific and very tailored for a board, and not, keys to the kingdom in ways that they could be distracted by that it would be a really positive thing.
Okay, and I'm just going to, there's another question that's kind of an add-on to that. Speaking of board members, is it a good practice to allow members of the board to make changes to data or add data, such as prospect information collection? In my view, I think you would want to limit their ability to change data, to change an email address or somebody's address. I think it's great if they're out there collecting names of prospects. So I think you need to kind of keep a barrier around that and not allow individuals from outside your organization to work to contribute too much to your internal data. You have any thoughts on that, Christie?
I love the enthusiasm. I love the enthusiasm of someone wanting to, get their hands dirty and be more involved in this. But I do think that it's important to have standard operating procedures around how data is maintained and who's responsible for making those changes. And I think that probably as a best practice, it would not be a board member. It would probably be somebody who's internal.
Okay. Here's one that I think we can all relate to. My boss is notorious for making bad decisions based on gut instinct. How do we begin introducing data?
Yes. I think we've all been there. Okay, so the way that I would recommend approaching this, it's delicate, obviously. I think that's probably why the question was asked. But I think if you can, you know your boss well enough to know that they're notorious for making bad choices based on gut. So you probably also know a few other things about them, and you might be able to anticipate the kinds of questions that they have. For example, maybe if you have an annual spend on some particular campaign, a conference, and they anecdotally think it's the best conference ever, and you're like, this is actually, I don't know that we have the data to support that this was actually a good conference for us. So you can anticipate something like that coming down the pike and having those conversations. And when you know those conversations are coming, do your research and come really prepared and come armed with data. So if you're doing your research ahead of time, you can pull all the information together to say, it's not my opinion versus your opinion. This is more about what does the data have to say. This is about giving a voice to what the data is saying instead of, what could be in tricky interpersonal conflict with somebody who might be senior.
This is an interesting one too, because I know that all of us get data from different sources, and the question is, a firm has provided us with updated addresses. Do we trust that the member gave us the right address, or do we update it with the information provided by the partner firm? How do we know which one to use?
Well, that might require just a little bit of research on your end. I would start with doing some investigation and pull, a sample size of records on that, and seeing if you can Google it or look in a database and try to figure out, like, is the information that we have on this person more accurate, or is what the firm giving us more accurate? And I think there's going to be a little bit of give and take there. There might be some testing. There might be some testing that you need to do.
Here's one about data culture again too. My organization doesn't have a culture that values data, and it's hard for us to find any real quality metrics. So what do we do about that?
Mm-hmm.
So where would you recommend starting with that?
Well, I would recommend starting small with that. I'd recommend starting small and starting basic and finding the lowest common denominator with your data. So if you're pulling in really, really basic numbers into your meetings, like last week we had this many members. This week we have this many members. Next week we'll have this many members, and just kind of pulling in like really, really basic information into your meetings. There is going to start being, there will start to be questions that are asked of that. If there are interesting data points that you're bringing, it's going to be, well, why are there that many members? Or how could we get even more members than that? Or why are so many members leaving? And there's kind of a little bit of investigation that happens from that point. And that's when you can start to develop out this data culture that's like, well, I'm not sure why that's happening, but that's interesting. Like, let's go back into the data and see what we can find. And then you're starting to use that as a baseline, right? It's becoming part of your process, is that you're starting to say, okay, well, what does the data have to say about this?
Here's a good one. If you wanted to begin campaign measurement with some easy wins, what would you suggest as a starting point? So I'm thinking like maybe they mean email campaigns, and you can get with some of the email software out there like Informs and others, just getting real good data off of that, like your opens and your click-throughs and so forth. But Christie, where else would you take that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think I would start with the data that comes out of the box for that sort of a thing. If that's what you're limited to at the moment, if that's what you have, then start with whatever metrics are available in the platform that you're using. And don't just look at one by itself, but look at them in context of other email campaigns. So you can say, well, as an average, out of the last 5 email campaigns that we've sent, we've had whatever percent open rate and this percent click rate, and then you can be able to say, well, this campaign was more successful. why was it more successful? And you can start to hypothesize on that, and you can take your next campaign and kind of test out some of that hypothesis and work towards building more successful campaigns based on just some of those basic numbers that you have.
And James has another question here. What advice do you have to get staff members, and everybody's probably chuckling to themselves when I ask this question because every group does this. What advice do you have to get staff members to stop keeping data in spreadsheets and get the data into the database? Boy, we all do that.
Yeah, I think everybody's guilty of that. Well, I think that it comes down to the sharing aspect. This comes back to the sharing aspect of your data. What is happening in your database? What are you using it for currently would be my first question. Because if you're using data currently in a real way in your organization and you're sharing it with other people, they're going to realize like, oh man, this is really powerful data, but what would be even more powerful is if I actually contributed my data to it. Because there's some inaccuracies that are represented there because not everybody's jumping in on this, not everybody's on the same team. But if you can build out a value of the data that you're showing, and if you're sharing it really well, I have a hunch that people are going to start to get more on board if they feel like they're more of the process. If they're all working towards this joint goal, and the only thing that's keeping us back from knowing the accuracy of this joint goal is their spreadsheet, and there's going to be a little bit of pressure there.
Great. Okay, well, I see two more questions here. One is, I've been tasked with researching, planning, and implementing a data initiative by March. How can I do that?
Yeah, that can be a lot. That can be daunting, especially if you're just starting right now. So I would recommend sitting down with the folks that gave you that initiative and trying to understand, and maybe you've done this, but my starting place would be to sit down and try to understand from those who are giving you that directive, what are the most important KPIs, the key performance indicators that I can provide from this? Because we're all about setting expectations, right? This is going to be an ongoing process. This is going to be a fluid process. And you need to have something that you can gear towards. You can absolutely have some really exciting things to show by March. Will you have a fully comprehensive, fully entirely baked BI strategy that will never change? No, you're not going to have that at any point because this is going to be a continual thing. So if you're setting expectations that you can have some exciting things by March, but ongoing, this is going to be a continual investment. This is going to be a continual effort that you might be able to find that you can have a more success, you can find more success in the stuff that you are doing, and you can also find a little bit more freedom in expectation setting and getting on the same page with that.
Very good. And here's one for all my small association friends that I work with a lot. I have hardly any budget or resources. All I can afford are manual spreadsheet reports. What would you do if you were me?
Well, manual spreadsheet reports are not the end of the world. I mean, they are a starting place, right? So we've kind of all been there, I think. And what I would do is I would consider where your revenue generating segment of your business is. And I would focus your spreadsheets and all of your data analytics effort on that particular area. So start with year over year, like where is the revenue generating, and do analysis on that. And then try to better understand your overall profit margin and start there and just kind of build it. This is going to be baseline metrics that everybody is interested in knowing. And you're going to prove value with that. Your data is going to be valuable. And they're going to start wanting more of it because they want to ask questions of it and they want to dig in a little bit deeper. And as you start to prove value with the metrics that you have, even on your really basic spreadsheet, they're going to want to invest in it because you're going to be incapable of giving the type of analysis that they're looking for with your spreadsheets. So eventually, if this is proving to be valuable to the company or to the association, that they're going to want to make that investment.
And we've had one more question come in since you were talking. You mentioned early in the presentation that over planning and rigidity lead to failure. Can you add some detail to your discussion of planning to flesh out what you want to be sure to include?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, generally, my philosophy around planning is, you know, there's nothing to stop you from getting started today on something like this. And there's kind of this, there's some philosophies that think you need to like do all of your database cleaning. Everything has to be perfect. You have to have all of your questions defined of your data before you get in. And I just simply don't see it that way. I just don't think that that makes a lot of sense. Like that's just not the process that makes sense with data. Like you start with data that might need some tweaking, it might need cleaning, but as you start with it, those kinds of things are going to come to light, right? You're going to be able to look at that and clean as you go. And you want a system and a platform that's going to support that. So as you're making these modifications and you're going through, you just want to be flexible. I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot of planning up front. I would say that you should plan to get started and keep going, keep moving things forward as you're learning more about your data.
Absolutely. I think we sometimes do overplan and then we get stuck. We kind of have this inertia because we think we have to have everything lined out perfectly so we know exactly how to approach this. But I think you're right. Getting in there, pulling out some of this data, let's look at events. Oh, that was great. Now let's take a look at our membership numbers and how that all pulls together. So I think you're right. Get in there and get going. Well, I think with that, I think we have answered all the questions out there. In the chat window, I've again put the link to the data analytics checklist that Christie has for us on their website. I do suggest you go check out their website, look at their product called Nucleus, because I think it will blow you away, and it's something that would allow you to start doing some of this stuff here. And with that, I will say thank you very much, Christie, and we certainly appreciate all your insights, and I hope some of the rest of us can get moving on this stuff now. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.